Hi, and welcome to the Soul and Survival podcast with Grant and Louise Bentley. We have run the Victorian College of Classical Homeopathy since 1995. We are both qualified practicing homeopaths, and Grant is also a naturopath. Together, we discovered a link between energy and facial structure based on traditional ideas from homeopathy that have roots going back 200 years. This project is called Homeopathic Facial Analysis, or HFA for short, and has been the cornerstone of clinical diagnosis and training courses since 1999. Between us, we have written and produced 7 HFA books, including Soul and Survival. Soul and Survival is the philosophy of energy influencing matter and how this energy forms individual facial structure, our unconscious drives and fears, our life patterns, and universal time cycles.
Hello everybody and welcome to the Soul and Survival podcast. My name is Grant Bentley and beside me is my wife Louise. And look, let's just get straight into it. What have you got for me today? What have I got to sort of rack my brain over?
Well, you don't have to rack your brain too much because we were having a really interesting conversation earlier today, and I really think when they organically come up, these conversations, we should follow them. So last time, we spoke about art or science, and you extended beyond the clinical aspects of homeopathy. And you have touched on miasms many times, which is the core of your work. So you probably need to do a little more about that specifically. So my question is, could you talk about the impact of miasms and specifically the miasm that we now live within?
You mean like its impact on culture?
Yeah,
right?
and how I'm not even sure to what degree you've explained the idea of the miasm within the individual, the miasm within a geographical area, and the miasm within a universal time. I mean, they're 3 very broad but important areas, and they all impact on us.
Yeah, it's okay. That's about as big a topic as what you can possibly get. So it might even need to be broken into bits at some stage. Excuse me. It might even need to be broken back into smaller bits. But so. First of all, it's really important to understand that what I talk about when I talk about miasms is nothing really like what Hahnemann was talking about when he spoke about miasms. Because a miasm in his idea is really just it's a passing on of genetic material, but the genetic material is essentially the diseased material that has now engrafted itself onto our genetic material designed to make us weaker as every generation goes along. Now, I'm not a fan of that. I don't know how he came up with the miasm and the whole 3 miasm aspect, because he was certainly on the right track. There's no doubt about that. But I think where it probably sprung from is from the previous Paracelsian alchemical writings, which had a lot to do with sulfur, salt, and mercury. Look, without going into that too much, because there's no need to go into that part too much, because in the end I'm going to turn around and say that I don't agree with it anyway. So I don't need to give a whole lot of I don't have to give a whole lot of explanation to something which I'm then going to turn around and say, however. So maybe just for convenience sake and just brevity, I might just go into what I mean rather than a compare and contrast. And what I'm talking about when I mean a miasm at a personal level is a miasm is a way that our body is programmed to deal with stress and repair and heal itself. Now, it has a particular pathway of which it will go about that healing, and that difference in pathway is what we call a miasm, or what I call a miasm, or what HFA calls a miasm. And that is, for example, and again, as we've said before, everything is about protecting the vital inner core. When you have a psoric person, they are programmed to throw any sort of danger or infection out to as far onto the periphery to protect the vital inner organs as best as their strength allows. So this is why when we double up on a psoric remedy, which also has that same centrifugal action, we are working harmoniously with the body. The same happens with every other miasm, the encapsulation or imprisonment of any sort of infection, virus or bacteria, which is what we call psychosis, or the inward conservation of energy to kind of maintain the fight, that is called the syphilitic miasm. So what I found was that once I began to do the face, which was a long time ago now, and that came about because I was reading in some books that the miasm will create or influence the body to the degree that its internal strength allows. Right. So what that means is that your body, the internal miasm is going to shape, let's just stick with the face. So it's going to shape as many facial features, even though we're talking about the entire body, including potential pathology. But just sticking with the face, that each miasm is going to create as many facial features in its own likeness as its inherent strength allows. So what the facial analysis part of HFA is about, it's about understanding how strong each miasm is by adding up the total of how many facial features belong to each miasm. And that way we can tell the internal strength and which one is dominant. Sticking with Sora, we know, and this took a long time, as you know, that to be able to collate all of these facial features. You know how many there are, more than I do.
I can tell you, in fact, not to the exact number, but there's around 75. So each of the three primary miasms, the yellow, which is Sora, the red, which is psychosis, and the blue, which is syphilis, have around 25 or 26 features. It's interesting, they've ended up being virtually equal, and the features are different, and they affect, the hairline, the forehead, the eyes, the nose, the mouth, the teeth, etc. So those 75 features, when you look at the strength of them on an individual's face, tells you the dominant miasm of that patient.
Yeah, that's right. So each miasm is going to influence the mold of the body in its own likeness to the strength that it has the ability to do so. So, for example, in a patient that might have, let's just say, 20 different facial features that can be labelled into a miasmatic category. If 10 of them are psoric, 5 of them are psychotic, and another 5 are syphilitic, then we know that this patient is psoric because it has double the strength of the other miasms. We can tell that by its facial feature influence. So we know that person is going to need a psoric remedy. So it doesn't matter whether or not Mercury, for example, was coming up number 1 in our repertorization, we wouldn't give it. We know that the potential for that Mercury to do either A, at its most positive, a limited job, then run out of steam, B, at its less positive, that it has no influence at all, or see in the negative that it will create an aggravation. Right? So we know not to choose it. And what I want to point out at this time is aggravations before I move on, because this would be the single biggest question that I get continuously asked by new patients before they trust me, right? Once they get to trust me, it doesn't matter. You just do it, and they leave it with me. But before they have learned to trust me, the single biggest question is, what about aggravations? Or they're so scared of aggravations. Now, this is common, that they're so scared of aggravations that any effect, and suddenly there's a panic button. And, so you get questions within 10 minutes of taking the remedy, this happened. Well, look, I mean, maybe if I'm terribly, terribly wrong. But an aggravation is not an exacerbation of pre-existing injuries, right?
Symptoms.
Or symptoms. Yeah. Actually, often, if it's pre-existing symptoms, that's often going to maybe lead you down the path that it's potentially curative, but you don't know that, because what you're doing is that you're just sort of shaking up the old bottle of water and sediment, and it's creating a bit of a mess. A bit like when you first start exercising. If you've been pretty darn sedentary for a few years and then all of a sudden you start exercise, you can be terribly sore. But that soreness doesn't mean that it's wrong. Right? That soreness means that you're doing the right thing.
So how do you differentiate that example from an aggravation to approving? I mean, I know people just get really worried.
Well, they do. But you've got to understand what approving is. You can only prove the wrong remedy for a start.
And it's a new set of symptoms.
Set of symptoms.
It's not
right. So all your old symptoms disappear, no matter how dramatic they are. The old symptoms disappear to be replaced by a new and often even greater in their severity set of symptoms.
That's approving.
Now, that's approving.
So what's an aggravation then?
Well, if somebody's got a lot of headaches and they say, well, I just took a remedy and my headache got worse, or, I got a headache again, or whatever it might be, that's not necessarily approving. But if a person's coming to see me for headaches or some sort of behavioural disorder, and then they say, I was always a happy-go-lucky person, now I'm depressed, or I used to be able to sleep really well and now I'm up till 5 a.m, or I never used to sweat at all, but now I seem to be having these fevers that are drenching the bed every time I go to sleep. This is all completely new.
Well, that's approving.
That's approving.
Okay, but what about the aggravation?
Well, an aggravation an aggravation of existing symptoms doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad prescription. You have to wait and see.
You don't know yet.
No, you have to wait and see, because there are two types of aggravation. One which is positive and you need to keep going, and one that is not so good and you need to stop.
And what's the difference?
Okay, the difference is that, first of all, you need to wait for both.
Yeah, because you don't know yet.
Because you don't know.
Yeah.
Right? So you need to wait for both. But a negative aggravation, rather than approving, but a negative aggravation is that your symptoms get worse for a period of time, and while you're taking the remedy, there is no amelioration at all, right? Because a homeopathic aggravation, as Kent used to talk about, which is what we'll call a positive aggravation, which is what fits into our we're just beginning to start to exercise sort of scenario that we spoke about before. That positive aggravation is that there is a short, sharp aggravation. I'll start again. Short, sharp aggravation followed by an amelioration. So you get.
And what's short? How would you define short?
Short would be anywhere between, say, 12 hours to about 4 or 5 days.
Yeah, and then anything beyond that, you're sort of looking at doing something else.
Starting to get into 5 days beyond,
Yeah.
and you're not getting any improvement, but you're still getting an exacerbation.
Yeah, not so good.
No, not so good.
But 1 or 2 or 3 days, this could be the beginning of something good. We just don't know yet.
You just don't know yet. And people hit the panic button. I understand why they do it, but they hit the panic button way too soon. And the fact is, with an exacerbation or an aggravation that happens immediately after a remedy, I don't know. I don't know.
And it could be something else.
Wait it out.
Could be something else. Could be an environmental factor. They might have just picked up a virus. There could be
You
something
see this
going
all
on.
the time in pandas, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So because pandas are particularly susceptible to any kind of infection, particularly strep, obviously, hence the S in pandas, but if they pick up a strep infection, or it doesn't have to be a strep infection, it can just a cold, it can be anything really, but they're particularly susceptible to that because their internal inflammatory levels are already high to precarious, right? So any sort of shove pushes them over the edge. So what can happen, particularly, is that and pandas kids have a tendency to, most of them are at school age and so on, so they're mixing with all these sort of viruses and whatnot. What I will often do, and pandas is a real problem when it comes to colds, flus, etc., because sometimes what happens is that the panda's child does not show any other illness symptoms other than an exacerbation of their behaviour. And that they don't throw fevers, they don't throw coughs and colds or headaches. In fact, some of them can be extremely well, but the only way you know they're sick, is an exacerbation of their behavioural symptoms. So the only way that you can tell whether or not it's an aggravation or an exacerbation based on maybe catching an illness, particularly when it's a patient that has only just started in the clinic, is you have no option but to stop.
And just see what happens.
You stop, you wait 3 days, 4 days, and then you either start again.
Or you can do the opposite. You can keep going for 3 days and then stop.
Well, you can, but most of the time I get them to stop.
Right.
Most of the time, just in case it's the remedy, I get them. And I don't know the case because you don't know if you're right.
No, it's
with
too
the remedy,
early. Too early
you
to
don't
tell.
know that. So I get them to stop. And if it's a remedy, then within, a 30C, like we've spoken about before, and the energy of a 30C cannot, particularly in a person whose nervous system is already heightened or their immune system is already heightened, the 30C cannot last more than 24 hours. It's impossible. You've used it up all that energy. I wait 3 days to be absolutely cautious, sometimes 4, to be right on the safe side. But the reality is within 24 to 48 hours, if that person remarkably gets better off the remedy, then I'll have to admit that
reassess.
That perhaps the remedy might be a contributing factor. However, if we're now day 3 or 4 and they've been off the remedy for 4 days or 3 or 4 days and those symptoms still persist, then it's not the remedy. There's another factor at play here.
And remembering that you've got the aggravation factor, but there's other people that just start slowly but gradually getting better. Then there's another group where they may not have any real response and you have to reassess the whole thing. But it seems interesting how many people worry about the aggravation when essentially it's probably only affecting about 1 in 10 scenarios.
You're taught to. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Right?
And because it's negative, you're on the lookout for it.
It's like when people come to see me and they're already homeopaths. I'll tell you that they'll aggravate off the remedy because they know about the aggravation.
Yeah.
No, it's true.
Going to show the state of mind is an impacting
And
situation.
the next group that will aggravate, not as much as homeopaths that become patients.
Don't you love them?
But the next group are people who have really researched aggravations on the internet.
Yeah, they're looking for it.
You're waiting for it. Right?
Yeah, and in a way, you could wake up any morning and go, am I going to have an aggravation today? Even if you don't take a remedy, you could, that little thing happened in my finger, or this happened in my stomach, or, I got that funny little twitch here or there. You can see things if you're really looking for them, can't you?
Oh, you absolutely can. And I know that there'll be people out there that hear this and will be really offended, but it's the truth nonetheless.
That doesn't mean that they don't occasionally occur, but one of the things with the facial method is you're matching the patient so nicely in their totality to the remedy. They're very less likely overall.
And remember too that there are good aggravations, and we get them a lot. It's like I said, it's like starting exercise. It's necessary.
Yeah.
You need to get these under siege areas or areas that are not efficient. You need to get them efficient again, or you need to calm things down. Another one will be if a really hyped up person, and then you start them with the remedy, and now all they want to do is sleep.
Yeah, which is
right, and they'll go, I'm aggravating, and that's all I want to do is sleep. But if you've come to see me because you're in this state of constant fight or flight or constant anxiety, the first thing that your body's going to do is take the opportunity to unwind its nervous system.
Yeah, so hence it wants to have a sleep.
Hence
it reminds me of one from years back, I remember, and this person did not know anything about homeopathy, and I had already got to a point where I didn't bother talking about aggravations or anything. It was just like, I'm giving you this, and hopefully it'll make you feel better, and I'll talk to you in a month. So it was pretty broad and open, so there was no sort of imposing their own belief system onto it. And he had bowel problems, and he took this remedy. And he told me 4 weeks later that within, literally hours of taking it, he evacuated this really horrible black stool. But because he didn't think in terms of it being a bad thing or whatever, he just sort of went with it. And then day 2, 3, 4, it all really started to clear up. And so by the time he saw me 4 weeks later, it was a distant memory, day 1, but he did mention it. And I remember thinking, wow, I'm glad you didn't hassle me about that.
No, well, that's because the better out than in philosophy.
Yeah,
right?
It is. It was his body just making this massive readjustment. It took a day, and then after that, things just got progressively better, and he just was great from that point on. Yeah. So interesting.
But it's difficult too when you're dealing with anxious patients, because they're going to hit the panic button.
Yeah, it's their nature. Yeah.
If they weren't like that, then they wouldn't be seeing you for anxiety in the first place.
But you don't get all patients like that,
No,
obviously.
not at all. And look, it's just negotiating your own way through. But the more honest that we are in this, then the more that people can understand what to expect too.
Well, I'm going to take you back to the original premise, and I know it's way off track, and it was really interesting to talk about that whole aggravation thing. But because you're speaking about anxiety, and we were talking about the miasm of our time, I'd like you to come back to that topic. We've got enough time to, give it a little bit of an overview, because it really is something that you see playing over and over in our culture, our society, the way people are behaving, the way they're parenting, the way they're dealing with their own health, all sorts of aspects. And it's coming from a miasmatic influence, and you can explain it. So it's pretty interesting.
We can explain it, and this was one of the things that I didn't fully understand, certainly when we started all of this back however many years ago
25 years ago now.
I wouldn't have thought it went this far. I just wanted to make homeopathy work more effectively in the clinic. That's essentially how this whole thing started, is that I got some hit and misses, and just enough hits to let me know that this model works, the homeopathic model works, that homeopathy works. Because sometimes I would, especially in the beginning, I really doubted it, Because it's a concept that you have to see work, because when you look at it on paper, you just think, oh, no, you're pushing it too far.
And don't even get started about the bottle and the drop. or the little pill.
That's right.
It's just,
that's right.
it's too much for your material mind to consider.
It's too immaterial for a material mind to grasp. It absolutely is. You're right there. Anyway, so one of the things that I noticed once getting facial features and understanding what groups people belong to, it's different now for me because I've ended up with almost an entirely pandas clinic, which is not the way that I intended it to be. But the problem with that pathology, not that it's a problem, no, hang on, let me say it because it makes it sound like...
from a philosophical point of view.
From a learning perspective, I'm not learning much more than what I already have about the greater understanding of homeopathy. You learn more about that particular pathology.
Yeah.
But see, at the beginning when I was treating a lot more adults and there was life stories and all this kind of stuff, what I could do was I knew what miasmatic group someone belonged to, and then they would tell me their life story. And one of the things that I found was that the life stories of each one of the colour groups or miasmatic groups was, well, similar. I mean, there were really identifiable similarities with all of this, and I found that fascinating. When I ended up coming across Kent talking about, and I think we've already done this before, but
not sure.
Kent talking about how each chronic disease of an epoch, a time era, represents the miasm, or at least represents the culture of that time.
The social conditions, yeah.
Then I went back in time and found that, sure enough, there was a scale of a repeating pattern that for... and maybe we'll go into this at another time, but for approximately 150 years there'd be a yellow time, and then that would give way to an orange time, and that would give way, and it was a cycle. So the earth goes in these cycles. Now the thing with those cycles is that whatever cycle you're in, the miasm itself influences the zeitgeist of that culture.
Which means it's going to influence all of us, this one overlaying miasm, even if it's not your personal miasm.
No, you can't fight this. This is so the earth has its own aura, so to speak.
It goes through phases, unlike us. Ours is one,
and that's because it's bigger,
life.
right?
Yeah.
So in the organon, the Hahnemann, when it comes to the separate diseases or the miasms, meaning that two dissimilar diseases, he says, of equal strength will combine, or two dissimilar diseases of unequal strength, the stronger will overpower the weaker. Right? So what you have there is that dissimilar diseases, in my language, are diseases and remedies and miasms that have a different energy. So Sora has the outward energy, which is different to psychosis, red, which has a circular energy, and so on. But what we do know is if they are of equal strength, and he says in a confined space, then they will join to cause a complex. Mm-hmm. So this is why you get tubercular, or what we would saw green, which is a combination of Sora and the syphilis, or you can get psychosora, and you get all of these different combinations coming up to the 7 different miasmatic groups that we use all the time. Now, brown is quite unique in this area because it is the only one that is about keeping balance in our small area, or the planet's small area, which it's small by comparison to a galaxy, a universe, and so on. So it's a confined space. So it has the task of balancing in equal proportions, because remember, if one becomes stronger, one of these forces, If one of these forces becomes stronger, then you're no longer brown, you're something else.
So they have to stay
So they
equal.
have to stay exactly equal. Now, the way that a miasm works metaphysically in this big part, now here obviously I'm not just talking about disease and trying to heal ourselves, I'm going into a more metaphysical concept here, is that we are adding and taking from this miasmatic field continuously. So if we go back, say, to around about the 1930s, 1940s. So we're in the green time, right? So green is influencing, but whatever, because it's there for our survival, this is the miasm, its role in the individual is to impart a whole lot of memories to make your nervous system instinctively reactive for self-protection whenever it sees a group of circumstances that are occurring in the present that may have represented danger in the past. Right? So it's preparing you. But not only that, not only is the miasm imparting onto us, by downloading all of this information into our unconscious and we react to it without knowing why, but we also contribute to it as an ongoing cycle. So the greater, the more, and despairing in a way, right? So, because remember, it's not about happiness. It's not trying to protect you from happiness. It's only trying to protect you from danger. And it's if you're miserable till you're 99, it doesn't care about that, as long as you live to 99, or at least long enough to impart your genes, right? So, but what happens is that whatever is happening on the earth, we then contribute back into this etheric miasm. It's a succussion. So our actions succuss onto the miasm of the planet a new set of memories and what will become instincts for a future generation.
Kind of like putting things up in the cloud and then drawing them back down again.
Well, kind of. Look, I'm going to bring it all back to homeopathy. You know how homeopathy works by you get let's take apis. So you get the bee and you crush up this bee and then you dilute it and you make a remedy out of it, and all the energy of that original substance is now imprinted onto our powder or our liquid as a remedy. And the more we succuss and dilute, the more we keep stamping the energy of that remedy onto the substance. Substance meaning water and alcohol or lactose. So the more that we succuss and dilute, the more we're continually stamping the imprint onto it until the imprint becomes so deep and so rich. And that's what our potency scale is, right? But we also create a potency scale socially. So the more that something happens to a community, the greater that energy is succussed into the miasm that surrounds the planet at that time. So, for example, and this is why I went back to the 1930s, 40s, for example, because the biggest thing that not only happened in that green time, but one could arguably say in all of history, is World War II. And all of the damage and all of the danger and all of the fear, and that is all been succussed onto the green miasm because that was in charge at that stage. So it becomes now something that it is going to impart on every single green person born on the planet from now to the end of time. And it will do so in a way where, now, how do you know which one? Like, there's 1,000, 1,000,000 things happen just in World War II alone. So how do you know which one? Are they all going to be imparted at the same level? No, they're not. Because the imprint depends on how many people suffered. So if one person suffered X, but 10,000 people suffered Y, then Y is both X and Y will go into the next green generation or the next green person, but Y will be the dominant one because too many people suffered from it. So life goes, well, okay, well, if that's the one that caused all the damage, we better make sure that doesn't happen again. So the next green person is going to come into this world with this unconscious fear of Y. You see how it works?
So tell us just briefly, because we're getting toward the end of our time, tell us about the miasm after World War II, because they go every 150 years.
Yeah, that was brown, which we live in now.
Not is, just was, but is, yeah.
That we live in now. So brown was the one that came in after green. Brown is still going to be around. My maths is terrible.
Well, mine's
2100.
Yeah, so what's really interesting is that next year is 75 years in, which is the halfway mark of this 150 years. And I think there's so many things that are different in a brown time to a green time.
Well, there is. And that's part. So people our age, right, we're in our 60s. So what happened is that we saw the tail end of green. So we grew up in an ethic which we find really unfamiliar now. And that's because the zeitgeist imprinted by Brown is entirely different to the ethics that our parents taught us, because they were more in green.
Yeah.
So our parents, being green, imprinted green ethics.
Living in green.
Yeah. They imprinted green ethics onto us, and we've seen the whole thing change. Mm-hmm. Whole thing change.
Flipped on its head.
There are things that we accept now. We're going to call it progress, but it isn't. It's just Brown influencing us.
Yeah.
We just have different values now and different ways of looking at things that green time would just scratch their head about it and say, you've got to be kidding me. Because it's like living on a different planet, because you are. You're living on a different planet.
And in 100 years, the people, our... what would you call them? Not our ancestors. What are they going to be? Our forebears? Or what is it as you're going down the generations?
Our future descendants.
Our future descendants, that's the word, sorry. Our descendants will look back at maybe 20, 24 or 25 and go, what were they thinking? Why did they do it that way? That just seems ridiculous.
Oh, they will. In 100 years' time, when it's orange, they'll be sitting down there looking at the way we value life and our set of values and what we're doing, and they will say, now, kids, that's why you shouldn't take drugs.
Literally.
Literally. So it will be a complete cultural change, as it always will be, and they just won't understand. So
just briefly, and this is just a huge topic, and we can do many more on this, but just briefly, what are the aspects of the Brown miasm that you see playing out culturally?
All right. Well, the first one is that, like we said earlier, that you've got 3 different groups or 3 different forces all vying. Well, I was going to say vying for competition, but in fact, in Brown, it's vying for stability. Mm-hmm. And it's really hard to be stable while everyone's jumping up and down going, look at me, look at me. Because the thing with any kind of energy is you can't change its pattern. You can't change its laws. And its laws are to dominate as best as it possibly can. Mm-hmm. Right, so to force it.
But now you've got 3 forces all trying to dominate.
Now, Brown is the balancing act between all 3 of them. So in its most positive, it's harmony. Mm-hmm. It's establishing an equilibrium. It's about seeing the strengths and weaknesses of all and bolstering up the weaknesses. Mm-hmm. The problem with brown, and we may as well stick with the problems more than the positives, because the positives don't need to be changed and we don't need to be made aware of them. The major positives of brown are that it is about harmony, it is about balance, and it's about assurance and reassurance that things are in a good place. So it's about fixing things that are broken, that normally other generations have left behind, but no, we're going to fix them. We're going to do the right thing. That's what the balance is. The problem with brown, and this is the problem for, I guess, this is the dominant influence on the world. We spoke about how the miasm influences the zeitgeist of culture, and then that zeitgeist of culture then demands obedience from the individual to go along with it. Right? So what brown does is that has in its negative a total fear that some of those bonds are going to be broken.
Mm-hmm. Because ultimately they will.
Because ultimately they will. Because even if time passes, they're going to. But the reality is that bonds can be broken at any time. So there is, at its absolute core, there is a petrified fear of death. That will...
And destruction.
Because brown is all about birth, death and rebirth, right? And that's why in the book I used to say, Soul and Survival, the architect is... archetypical, not architect. The archetypical representation is the craftsman, always looking for something to do better, something that they can machine to be finer. There's got to be a better way of doing things than this. Change, though, for change's sake sometimes. And what are you doing? You're trying to secure yourself constantly with this. And so when you've got its imprint on society, the negative part of it, the positive, as we said, is really a nurturing harmony and a refinement, a development of things that really make life better. But the negative part of this is that at this deep level, they know that there's going to be a self-destruction.
And they go on about it a lot.
And a lot of this is seen, is in a rejection of anything that symbolically represents death in any of its forms, including the rise of veganism, I might say, right? And because... Oh, God.
There's a separation from nature, from the organic. There's an artificial component. And so when you become divorced from the cycle of food, from the land, from where food comes from, how it's packaged and brought to the supermarket.
Well, in order to be a craftsman, you have to improve, don't you?
Yeah. You're always looking for something better.
And you even have to improve on nature. Yeah. Even nature's not got it quite right.
No, they're not totally
happy with nature. If we can just tweak God here and there, then it'll be better. I'm not trying to say I'm as good as God, but you did make some mistakes, right? So it's this idea, and so, but there's a contradiction to that. So they want to make things better all the time, but at the same time, there's a kind of demolishment of what's already good in order to make it better.
Isn't it a bit like, when you're cooking something and what is it, you've overstirred the pot, that sort of thing. You were really going well, things are going well, but you just didn't leave well alone. You had to overfiddle and now you've mucked it up.
Yeah, you do. I mean, if you're going to stick with the cooking analogy, the biggest problem with brown, and this is not just brown people that they have to be aware of as individuals, but us in a brown society, is we do have a tendency to over-egg the pudding.
Over-egg the pudding, that's right.
We're going to over-egg the pudding, and that just mucks it up. You're trying to do the right thing.
That's not a slight on eggs, which are a very nutritious and wonderful food.
Eggs are very nutritious. In fact, you should eat eggs more often. But what it does do, though, is what you see here also, which I think is a really big part of Brown, is that any weak link has got to be strengthened.
Mm-hmm.
And often what it is that it's given more emphasis than what it actually deserves.
More energy, yeah. And you've got to take energy from another area to do that.
Yeah, you do. So what we're seeing in culture at the moment is anyone that was regarded as a dominant personality, like a white male.
Okay.
No, honestly,
No,
this
I
is true.
understand.
I mean, I sit back, I don't talk about this stuff. Patients know I don't talk
No,
about
of
this
course
stuff
not.
all this
But
month.
why not?
But it's true.
Yeah.
It's true. This is, you cannot, look, you can't woke up truth.
Yeah.
Right? It's either true or it isn't. And I can't sit here and sort of say, well, it's kind of true, but here's how I'm going to put sugar on it.
Yeah.
Because sugar's bad for you for a start.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to sugar up
It
anything.
might look pretty, but
If you don't like what I say, then turn off.
Yeah,
I mean,
of course.
But like, so what you're doing is that you take dominant figures, because remember in Brown, you can't be dominant, right? Everyone
tear them
has to
down.
be equal.
you have to bring them
So
down.
they have to come down.
Yep.
And whatever was suppressed or repressed
Yeah.
has to be brought up.
Yeah.
And it has to have equal say, regardless of
Merit.
whether it deserves
Where
that
it's got the
equal
merit,
say.
yeah.
And that doesn't mean to say, like, if you're talking about, all right, they're all people that, because I said white male, they're immediately going to go to either some sort of colour or sexual diversity. So it's really important for me to highlight that we're not talking about rights here. Everyone has should have the ability to have the same legal rights and the same right to happiness. So that's not what I'm saying. But whether or not a bigger group needs to have things taken away from them, so a smaller group can have more influence. Well, that's kind of not how democracy works.
Well, it's not democracy, it's communism, of course, and that has its own idealistic, this idea that everyone has exactly the same, but the problem is then there's no striving, then there's no personal
Well, I wrote in
ambition.
Soul and Survival that one of the biggest problems for Brown is that it comes up with artificial solutions to natural problems.
Yeah.
And one of the real big problems why they have to do that is you talk about an inconvenient truth. The inconvenient truth is that we're not born equal. We're born with equal rights, or we should be born with equal rights.
We have different skills.
We have different skill sets.
Different families.
And that's just the way. Some people are smarter than others. Some people are stronger than others. Some are more musical. Some are more beautiful. There's all of these things where we are absolutely unequal. And the reason for that is because evolution requires diversity
for strength.
For its own strengths.
Yeah. It's a good thing.
It's a good thing.
It's a good thing if you can see it in that way. But unfortunately, if you get caught up in the word equal and you apply to everything all the time, you end up being so monocultural that you actually destroy all the beauty that was there in the first place. And that's
you not only destroy all the beauty, you're just plain bloody wrong.
Yeah.
Not all answers are right.
Yeah.
Right? I remember one person even saying this just about homeopathy, that all methods, doesn't matter, all roads lead to Rome. Well, no, not all roads lead to Rome.
Not.
Some lead to Adelaide, and that's just
and
the way.
Who wants to go there? No.
Well, you said that. I didn't say that.
That's a joke. People in Adelaide. Adelaide's a very beautiful city.
It is a beautiful
but
city.
But it is not how you get to Rome.
It's not how. It's the long way to Rome. Yeah. That's for sure. And so the reality is that not all answers are equal, but all human beings' equal rights are equal, and all of their pursuit of happiness, so to speak, is also equal.
In their
but
own
their
diverse
skills
way.
are not equal.
Yeah.
And we live in an unequal world. And so what Brown has to do is that it has to start with the starting place that we're all equal. We have to make rules that we're all equal. And automatically you're wrong. You're just
You're
wrong.
not acknowledging what
Right?
is.
It's not how life works. So what they're doing is they're almost making this completely artificial construct of how life works as a way of sort of saying, well, this is the ideal that we should be aiming for, but it just can't. But I understand anyway.
But you know where it comes from.
The point is not whether or not they're right or wrong, even though they're wrong. That's not the point of this conversation. The point of this conversation is understanding why you would even start with an obviously wrong starting point of equality. And that's because of the Brown influence.
Yeah.
Right? It's pushing. And that Brown influence of making everything equal is just society's... It's just you know how there's ripples in a pond, or when you look at homeopathy, there is a certain stress that happens in the body. And that can be an emotional stress, an energetic stress. That stress then filters out to change your way of looking at things, then filters out further to include the emotions, then filters out further to include the physical body, which then filters out even further like a ripple in a pond to include now pathology. But every aspect of that is a representation of what preceded it. It's still exactly the same. It's the same stone that was thrown in the pond, and that it's the same effect that makes all the ripples. To look at each ripple as an individual thing is to miss the point. And so what we're looking at with Brown is, yes, there is the idea to harmonize everything, to nurture everything, but at its basis, at its most basic level, if you go beyond that, we're now working from the outer ripples to the inner ripples. You're looking at a society that is anxious and fearful, because that's what Brown is, the constant fear that something is going to go wrong. Yeah. One of those bonds is going to break, and then we don't exist anymore. And I think that even that idea of non-existence, non-specialness, has also led to the phenomenon of the whole social media phenomenon of essentially people just, like influencers and stuff. It's just, here I am. Don't forget that I'm here. Don't forget me.
No content.
It doesn't matter about the content. It's just, look at me. I'm still here. It's this thing of being alive. And it's also the purity. And that purity means that because decay is death. Right? So it's this symbolic drive for purity, which is the cure for the decay and death, which can be seen in things like veganism and a virtual now spiritual movement that's almost animistic, going back 1,000 years, where it's nature worship. And don't worry about God. We won't go to church. We won't go to the synagogue, or we won't go to the Buddhist temple, whatever is your religion. But it's almost earth. Now, to the point where people are now starting to talk that there's too many of us, that the earth would be better off without us. That if we could just get rid of human beings, we'd go back to this pristine place. Which pristine place was this? What, the dinosaurs that were tearing each other apart? But we have a beautiful garden. How many times do we have to pull out weeds or other plants because they're surrounding plants that are next to it and trying to choke it to death? Or there are plants that are trying to grow and spread out to deny sunlight to any saplings that's underneath. We don't see it in that fashion because Brown doesn't want to see it in that fashion.
Because perfection is their goal, their filter, their mirror.
Harmony.
Yeah.
But there is no harmony.
Yeah.
There's only competition.
Yeah.
That's what the world is for.
It's very tricky being in a Brown time when you're a pragmatic person who understands, what survival is all about.
Yeah. Survival is there to push you. That's its role. Anyway, we've overgone. We've got people waiting for us for dinner.
That's okay. We probably should have allowed a little more time. Great conversation. So much more to talk about, and we'll try and keep going next time.
All right. See ya.
Thanks, Grant. Thanks for listening to Soul and Survival. If you are interested in more information, books, courses, consultations, learning more about facial analysis or life themes, please visit our college site, Victorian College of Classical Homeopathy, vcch.org.